the holiness of God is God's in a category by himself. Soren Kierkegaard called it an infinite qualitative distinction, which that's really fancy philosophical language, but if you read the Bible cover to cover, Chris, I think there's one inescapable, undeniable, incontrovertible conclusion. God is God, and I'm not. And we have a lot of people running around, and I make no apologies for saying this, who think they're smarter than God, who somehow think that they know better. And I would argue that true knowledge results in humility. Why? Because the more you know how much you don't know.
Oh, Mark, welcome back to the podcast. I don't know, third or fourth time. It's always great to see you, and I'm excited to jump in with you today. Welcome.
Well, good to be back, Chris.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so opening question. How does Capitol Hill feel this week? What in the world? Let's just timestamp it. We're a few days away from the election, so when this airs, we're going to be beyond it. We're going to know what happened. But how is the temperature?
Yeah, the temperature is hot.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I think we feel some of that political polarization in a unique way because we've lived on Capitol Hill for 28 years, and it's just a little bit more amplified and intensified these days, and that could be a reflection of lots of things that we don't have to rabbit trail, but you know, I mean, everything kind of gets amplified and intensified these days. So, but I'm loving life, and you know, we're going to keep on keeping on doing what we do.
That's right.
One way or the other.
That's right, Mark. Yeah, the reason I ask that is because really where we're going today in the conversation with Mark, folks, is we're going to really unpack what it takes to see the Lord in a new way, to see his bigness, his goodness, amid the craziness of life. And Mark, I think one of the things I'd love to nuance as we begin is, though, most of us, I think we're living in a mode of fight or flight. And we've been here for as long as I can remember. If you were to biopsy this abnormality, what's your diagnosis on that? I've heard you preach on it lately. That's why I ask.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think that's really accurate. People are living fight or flight. I mean, if we're spending 2 hours and 22 minutes a day on social media, then my question would be, what percentage of your thoughts, words, and actions are a regurgitation of the social media and news media that you're consuming? And what percentage is grounded in God's Word or grounded in a relationship with Jesus? I think God is always writing a bigger story, Chris. That's something I keep coming back to. So administrations come and go. The kingdom is forever. And I'm not saying elections aren't important. And I'm a guy, I mean, I pastor a church with hundreds of people that work on Capitol Hill. So I love it. I embrace it. Politics matters because policy matters because people matter. At the same time, there's a bigger play. We have a different end game. And what I keep saying to our congregation is, don't lose heart, don't lose faith, don't lose hope. Don't lose sight of the end of the story. So I think that's critical in moments like this, because usually when I'm stressed out, it's because I'm zoomed in on something I'm frustrated about. And I've got to zoom back out and see the big picture. And so that's a major life lesson that I've learned over many years of leadership. When I'm discouraged, when I'm frustrating, okay, I'm probably zoomed in on something that I don't like right now, and got to zoom back out.
Okay, so to zoom out, I think that's such a critical posture. I want to ask how we embody that. Hebrews says that everything that can be shaken will be shaken, and we're seeing that right now. But there's a why, so that the unshakable will arise. So amid this, the posture, what I heard you say is, get vision of the bigger play and zoom out. You want to walk us through the mechanics of what that involves? I think that's part of the meta-narrative of even this new message.
Yeah, well, I think it's a Hebrews 12:27 moment. That's the verse that you just poked at. That I think God is shaking false narratives, false securities, false identities, false idols. And we don't trust in horses and chariots. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. So I do think it's a moment where it feels like those shakeable things, it's shaken big time. But that's when we're called to stand in the gap, I think, as peacemakers, grace givers, truth tellers, tone setters. And so the way I'm coaching our congregation and the way I'm trying to posture myself, which, by the way, posture is really, really important right now. Not just position, but posture. And so what we want to do, and we call them four principles, but we want to listen well, ask anything, disagree freely, but love regardless. And those are not easy things to do, but I think that's how we're trying to live out this moment. And, you know, it was Dr. King who said, we're not called to be thermometers that reflect room temperature. We're called to be thermostats. We shift the atmosphere with faith, hope, and love. So when and here's a question for every listener right now. When you walk in the room, what happens emotionally? Like, that's a big deal. Does the level of anxiety go up or does it go down? I think that's a good test of leadership. This I know for sure. When Jesus walked in the room, anxiety levels went down, my friend. You know, if you've got Jesus in the boat, even if you're in a storm in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, guess what? He can stand up and say, "Peace, be still." So I think there's a modeling there of how we posture, how we approach kind of cultural moments like this.
Go back to your note about false narratives, false securities, and false idols. I mean, can we name a few of those? I think a lot of times these things live under the radar, under the surface of the heart, sit in the subconscious. We believe them, we buy into them, and we don't know we're doing them. But if we can call them out and name them, we can go, oh, I can be more proactive in my day-to-day engagement with everyday life to be smarter about this. What are a few of those, Mark?
Let's dive into the deep end, Chris.
Yeah, Mark.
I mean, some are pretty obvious. That I think a lot of people trust their bank account more than they trust God. And money becomes the source of security. Financial security becomes the end-all and the be-all. But I just think that's a house of cards. But I think, you know, a good example of maybe, relativism runs rampant in our culture. And in other words, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. The problem with that is it's not true. At some point, your truth is going to bump into my truth, then what's true? And so I think, you know, even the fact that in some ways, like, we live in a culture that touts tolerance unless you dare disagree with the cultural narrative, which is so duplicitous. And so often those who accuse of bigotry are guilty of it. I mean, I think another example would be that live in a culture that it's wrong to say something is wrong. I think that's wrong. I do think there's a right and a wrong. But please hear my heart. Like, I want to be more known for what I'm for than what I'm against. I want to criticize by creating Michelangelo. But I do think that there are these ideologies. And, well, since we're bringing that up, if you filter your biblical theology through your political ideology, it's called idolatry. So I think we have to be really careful. And Chris, one of the things I appreciate about you is we got a head on our shoulders. Logic, reason, these things are a gift from God. And I think we need the integrity to be well thought, to be thoughtful, to be mindful, not to overthink, not to get in our head, but as those who follow Jesus, like, let's do it in a thoughtful way. Yeah.
Oh boy, you have opened such a cool can here, and I want to ask so much about what you've just said. You quickly gave me a phrase, and it was criticize by creating Michelangelo. Now, what I think I heard you say is we can actually have a better response to criticism by actually being innovative and bringing solutions to the world. I think that's the nuance of what you said, but I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people listening to us right now sort of having a pulse on some of the folks who are part of your audience. You've got ideators and creators and entrepreneurs, people that want to make a difference in the world. And I liken it to Paul in Athens, where he walks into the Areopagus and he competes in the marketplace of ideas. And so my take on that is, let's write better books, let's produce better films, make better music, start better businesses, draft better legislation. How? With the help of the Holy Spirit. So I think anybody, Chris, can criticize by criticizing, but that's a little bit of a cop-out. Like anybody can point out problems. What we need are some supernatural solutions. And that's where, even as a pastor of a church that maybe is a little different than your average church, we're not trying to build a church. We're trying to bless a city to the third and fourth generation. I mean, yesterday I was with the mayor of our city, and we're talking about what are the real issues, what are the real problems, and how can the church step up and step in. So there are statistics that we love to change in the nation's capital. So we built a $5 million dream center. We operate 64 programs that are blessing and challenging and discipling kids, helping them find a dream that they can get from God, something to go after. And so I just, that whole idea, criticized by creating, I think is the posture that we're called to have as Christ followers.
When I hear you talk about that and being innovative and creating and being a solutions provider, that infers that I have a good view of the Lord, the God who created the universe, who lives in me. On the other side of it, though, makes me wonder, your words, do we have an impoverished view of the Lord, and how so? I actually never put legs on that phrase until I heard you.
Well, that's a big question, because my whole premise is that our biggest problem is our small view of God. So, in the beginning, God created us in His image. We've been creating God in our image ever since. And what happens is, if you aren't careful, God becomes a projection that, wow, He thinks like us and looks like us and maybe even votes like us. But God is wholly other. I mean, the holiness of God is God's in a category by Himself. Soren Kierkegaard called it an infinite qualitative distinction, which that's really fancy philosophical language, but if you read the Bible cover to cover, Chris, I think there's one inescapable, undeniable, incontrovertible conclusion. God is God, and I'm not. And we have a lot of people running around, and I make no apologies for saying this, who think they're smarter than God, who somehow think that they know better. And I would argue that true knowledge results in humility. Why? Because the more you know how much you don't know. And so I don't know how we got there, but I am enjoying this conversation.
Me too. I always love having you on. So it's interesting, Mark, because the other day I interviewed Rod Dreher, the author of Live Not by Lies, and I presented to him sort of this this idea I've been working on, trying to figure out and get under the hood of self-creation. Self-creation is nothing new in our culture, but it certainly seems like it's white hot right now. Expressive individualism says that my feelings are authoritative and decisive in truth, my truth, your truth, whatever. Self-creation, propagated by guys like Nietzsche, would say that if God is dead, therefore I'm not accountable to him, therefore it is my responsibility to self-create. How do you see self-creation interrupting our vision of an up-close, personal God and the vastness and greatness of our God? How does it blind us and distract us?
Well, I might come at this from a couple of angles.
Great. Take wherever you want.
Do we really think that we can raise generations of children, tell them that they're a cosmic accident, the result of random chance, and actually think that it's not going to affect their psyche? Like, this is common sense. And that's where I would lean in. And, I write quite a bit about this, kind of poking at it in the book, that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are God's workmanship. But here's what I would see. Here would be my twist, Chris, because I do have, to me, true wisdom has two sides, Job 11:6. So truth is found in the tension of opposites. So I have a strong belief in the inherent value of every single person, that everyone is invaluable and irreplaceable. But that doesn't lead to a path of I am God. It leads in a different direction towards a responsibility towards others who are also created in the image of God. So the way that I would say it is, there never has been, never will be anyone like you, but that's not a testament to you. It's a testament to the God who created you. And so the significance of that is this: no one can love like you, lead like you, worship like you. No one else can live your life for you. And so I think a theology of dignity, that everyone is invaluable and irreplaceable. Why? Because they are the apple of God's eye. They are the image of God. And so, Chris, I think God has left us what I would call creation clues. And some of those clues are, you have a unique fingerprint, voice print, eye print, and sweat print. Like the 373 chemicals that comprise sweat combine in a way that's absolutely unique to you and me. And we can't tell the difference, but our dogs can. And speaking of, did you know that dogs have a unique nose print, which I just love?
No, you're kidding me. Did you find that out researching the book?
Yes,
or I know you're a voracious reader.
Researching this book.
No way.
I was curious because dogs have an olfactory capacity that's way beyond humans. They can smell time, and they kind of have this ability to smell while they inhale and exhale. And so I was studying the anatomy of a dog's nose, and then stumbled across the fact that they have a unique nose print, which I think these are little things, but they're big things that point to an intelligent designer who wanted to communicate, hey, I love creativity, I love variety, and by the way, I love you. Yeah.
What do you mean by dogs can smell time?
Well, when you walk around the block, it's crazy. They're able to smell things that were minutes ago or days ago. Our capacity to smell is so limited. They just have such a sensitivity to smell that it's almost like a superpower. And of course, I mean, certain breeds too have the ability to sniff a bomb or track a scent. And so where I go with that is I just have a little bit of fun with the animal kingdom, that we're unique because of the Imago Dei. But the truth is, there are whatever we can do, there's usually an animal that can do it better than us, which I think is kind of fun. I mean, an owl's sense of hearing, for example, their ears are asymmetrical, by the way, which means they can hear distance and they can hear direction. Oh, and they can twist their necks, I think, like 270 degrees. So,
wow. Oh my gosh. Okay, but even that fun fact points me to rediscovering the God who is bigger than big.
Yes.
Your words, right? So
yeah.
just to stay here even more in our pursuit, folks, listen, like we are a week out of a hot election season. And I think my goal and Mark's goal for you today is to help you get a bigger view of the God who created you, the universe, so you can step into his eternal purpose. One of the things, Mark, I was thinking about in prep for our conversation today is how, your words, an impoverished view of the Lord could promote, exacerbate, and fan the flames of bitterness and cynicism in our heart, and how bitterness and cynicism promote a myopic view of his presence in our lives. I want to just kind of get your heart in this season on bitterness, cynicism. What do you see as the root causes of bitterness within the human heart? It's a big deal for me.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I think every problem, potential, and propensity can be reverse engineered from Genesis 1, 2, and 3. So we have been playing the shame game and the blame game since the Garden of Eden. And it's true even in culture. Everybody is blaming everybody else for everything. And nothing ever gets accomplished that way. But, I think save for what Christ accomplished on the cross for me, someone who carried a 300-pound cross 650 yards down the Via Dolorosa for someone else's sin, barring the cross, I just don't have it in me to forgive. What I have in me is to get even, Chris. Like, I'm so easily offended. I'm so easily irritated. But the only way to elevate above that is there's a proverb that says it's to the glory of a man to overlook an offense. And so my goal is to be unoffendable. I'm just not going to let a seed of bitterness take root in my heart. Because, someone has said that, like, that harboring bitterness towards another person is like ingesting rat poison and thinking it's going to kill the rat. It's not. It's going to kill you. And so I'll also say this: the hardest person to forgive is the person who looks back at me in the mirror every day. So I think living in a place of perpetual grace and forgiveness is right at the core of what it means to carry our cross and to follow Christ.
Yeah, so what's your first move when the seed of cynicism and bitterness tries to get in your heart? What's your first move?
Yeah, first move for me, because there are people who get under my skin. There are people who say things, do things, and by the way, usually it's worse if it's something that someone does or says to my kids or my wife. Now it's game on. Now I'm ticked. Now I'm going to take you down. Like that's my initial reaction. But what I start to do is I start to pray for that person, Chris. It's the 6 antitheses in the Sermon on the Mount. Pray for those who persecute you. Bless those who curse you. Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. Give the shirt off your back. There's nothing natural about those. Those are sanctified reactions. Those are redeemed reactions. And to me, that's the true test. It's a lot easier to act like a Christian than it is to react like one. But your reactions really reveal what's happening in your heart. So, and don't listen to this, everybody, and just go on a guilt trip. This is a no guilt trip show. What I think you do with that is, okay, that's an indicator. Why am I overreacting, or why am I so upset? And that's where you need the emotional maturity, the emotional intelligence, kind of the wherewithal to, deep breath, step back, zoom out, and big picture, I am not going to take offense. By the way, the best defense is a good offense sometimes. And so keeping a gratitude journal is a great way to really stay focused on what you're grateful for. Because we either take things for granted or we take things for gratitude. Whatever you don't turn into praise turns into pride. So I think really learning to cultivate a gratitude habit is, I would consider it even a spiritual discipline.
Yeah, so what does a low view of God do to our mental health?
Well, it changes everything. I mean, A.W. Tozer said, what comes to mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. So, Chris, there's a lot of people, and I hope this is received as, well, let me really think about how I think about God. That a lot of people, there's almost like if they grew up in a legalistic church or grew up with a parent that was maybe a little harsh, the tendency is to almost think of God as a cosmic killjoy when nothing could be further from the truth. Newsflash, God is in a good mood. That God is the one who created us with the capacity for joy. I think laughter is part of the image of God because it's something that sets us apart from the rest of creation. And so even the first tenet of the Westminster Catechism, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So how much, Chris, just to be blunt, like if someone doesn't have joy, I don't want what they have. So I think joy is really, really important. And how much are you enjoying a relationship with God is a critical barometer of whether or not you have the right picture of God. Because here's what I know for sure. God is rejoicing over us with singing. And that's God's posture towards us. And then I think the way that we respond to the God who rejoices is by cultivating that same kind of joy.
It's amazing. Just as you were sharing, I think about Nehemiah 8:15, because the joy of the Lord is our strength, and that strength empowers us to get up every day and to respond well. Which leads me to this: the key to spiritual growth is routine. Say more. Wow.
Yeah, but once a routine becomes routine, you have to change the routine.
Okay. Nuance that, Mark.
Well, it's the law of requisite variety, that if you go to the gym, work out the same way, same sequence every time, it loses effectiveness. So what a good trainer does is they confuse your muscles. And I think good leaders confuse people, but they do it intentionally. They throw curveballs. And so a good example is, I have a Bible reading plan, but every year I try to change translations. Because I want different words that make my brain fire in different ways. So I might go from an NIV to a KJV to an NLT, but it's a good example. Another approach to this, Chris, is change of pace plus change of place equals change of perspective. And so one simple way to just change that routine is you change pace or change place, and it helps you think differently. So routines are going to make you or break you, but I think sometimes you have to change those routines just to keep it fresh.
Yeah, so let's stay on changing pace and place and correlate this to natural blind spots we all have. Let me just ask you, as a pastor and a leader in the body of Christ, father figure, What do you think is one of the biggest blind spots plaguing us as believers today, whether in our character, in our maturity? What are you and Laura sensing and feeling?
Wow. Can I answer it in a rather unconventional fashion?
Of course. Yeah, please. Please.
Right now, Chris, we're on a planet that's spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, speeding through space at 67,000 miles per hour. So even on a day we didn't get much done, we did travel 1.6 million miles through space, and we don't give it a second thought. You don't at the end of the day kneel next to your bed and say, Lord, I wasn't sure we were going to make the full rotation today, but you did it again. It's not like, Lord, thank you for keeping us in orbit. We tend to take constants for granted. And this is where G.K. Chesterton said that the key is to marvel at the permanent thing, not the exception. He said we should be startled by the sun, not by the eclipse. And that's where I would say there are everyday miracles, a million little miracles all around us, all the time. And what we have to do is cultivate, maybe it's a sixth sense, but a sensibility to the miracle that is everything. I mean, there are 37 sextillion biochemical reactions happening in the human body at any given moment. And I didn't get up this morning and flip a switch or turn it on. It just happens. In Him we live and move and have our being. So I guess my stream of consciousness is there are big miracles and small miracles happening all the time, but we just go about our daily lives and we don't really think about it, even though they're hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, so how do many of us then self-sabotage our growth in such a sneaky way that we don't even recognize we're doing it?
Well, I think we fall asleep and we don't wake back up, Chris. Carpe wonder. How do we wake up to the life that we're intended to live? And by the way, when Jesus said you must become like little children, I think part of that is recapturing a childlike wonder. Just sort of a delight about life, a spontaneity, a playfulness that may not sound super spiritual, but this is how God created us. He created us with a playful nature, and you may be listening and saying, Mark, come on, that's not what glorifies God. Well, let me ask the question this way. As a parent of 3 kids and now a grandfather, can I tell you what brings me some of the greatest joy? Watching my kids play sports, play instruments, play Legos, play anything. There's something about that playfulness is something that is such a gift from God. And I think it may be more spiritual than we think. And I think Jesus was far more playful than we give him credit for. Well, like in the boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, in the middle of a storm, he's taking a nap. There's part of me that wonders if he was faking it, Chris. Like, I'm just going to pretend to be asleep just to see how the disciples... And I want to be careful here. Listen, for the record, I'm not saying that he was faking it. I'm not. That's eisegesis. It's reading into the text. What isn't there? Right. But don't tell me Jesus didn't have a little fun walking through the wall and appearing to his disciples, or even Lazarus come forth. There's a certain shock and awe that I think in some ways he did what he did in a way that was joyful and playful. And even, really discipleship, it was hiking, camping, fishing, sailing, climbing mountains for the better part of 3 years. It was this adventure that he took them on. And so... what we've done is reduced it to in a literated lecture that happens in a classroom, and if you know the 4 spiritual laws, or you know the 1, 2, 3 ABC, you're good to go. But that's a very that's not as authentic and organic. I think true discipleship happens when you're buckled into the roller coaster and you're going around hairpin turns and you're living a life that's full of ups and downs, but Jesus is at the center of all of it.
What I heard you say is if I know the formula, now folks listen, because a lot of us do this. If I know the formula, I can force an outcome, keep myself emotionally safe, and remain, in a sense, in control. But we have to embrace the journey and embrace mystery. What are the things then, Mark, even to connect this question to what we talked earlier about regarding routine, what are the things that we do to trick ourselves into believing that we're growing and moving forward and maturing when in reality we're just spinning our wheels?
Yeah. Well, there's a long history. If don't do this, don't do that, and you're okay. That is holiness by subtraction, but it's also called legalism. You can do nothing wrong and still do nothing right. Goodness is not the absence of badness. So what I'm talking about is playing offense and really, really seeking God first, not second, third, or 10th. And then everything becoming an expression of worship, living for the applause of nail-scarred hands. Well, Mark, how does that practically play itself out? Well, Chris, I don't write books. You know what I do? I take my shoes off because I think it's holy ground. And I don't type with a keyboard. I worship God with 26 letters of the English alphabet. Like that calling, that occupation of writing books, for me, is a form of worship. And if Paul said, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do it to the glory of God, well, that tells me that everything can be done in a way that glorifies God because you're living for that audience of one.
I just want to keep nailing this point, and that is so good. This is the subtitle. I'll just take a moment. Your brand new book, A Million Little Miracles. Rediscover the God who is bigger than big, closer than close, and gooder than good. I love that. You made this statement in the book that I loved, that blessing is our birthright. I want to nuance this because I think about how deception plays a role in sabotaging our ability to live in that reality. Perhaps we work for things that have already been made available to us by the finished work of Jesus. How can we navigate situations where the lines between truth and deception seem really blurry? Like,
wow.
If blessings are birthright, let me just kind of flex this a little bit better. Deception can tweak our ability to see what's already ours.
Yeah. Well, before original sin, and I'll go on record, I'm a sinner in need of a savior. Like, no one's perfect. Everybody needs, I without the Holy Spirit, I'm below average. But before original sin, two things. There was original blessing. Like, that is the very first thing that God does. This is God's most ancient emotion. It's his nature to bless. And that's why the Abrahamic covenant is a covenant of blessing. And then you get to the New Testament and it's the cup of blessing. That's what the communion cup is called. So this is a God from beginning to end whose nature it is to bless his creation. So original blessing precedes original sin, and that sequence is significant. But I would also say before original sin, there was original doubt. The enemy tried to cast doubt on the goodness of God, that God is holding out on you, that you can't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Meanwhile, I think it's like 300,000 varieties of different trees in the garden. So you could eat from 299,999. God's not holding out on you. But what the enemy does is get us to focus on that forbidden fruit. And if you're looking for something to complain about, Chris, oh my goodness, we'll find it, won't we? But if you're looking for something to be grateful for, you will find that as well. Your focus determines your reality. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And that's where seeing with spiritual eyes, and I would then really focus on, if you're focused on a million little miracles, guess what? Life becomes a miracle. Now you're living it. And now I begin to treat other people, oh, you're a miracle. You were made a little lower than the angels and crowned with glory. Why don't we treat each other that way? It really begins to permeate the way that I see life, the way that I see myself, and the way that I see others.
This is amazing that you're saying this, because earlier you gave us the phrase, the theology of dignity. And folks, like, as you're listening to this, we are 14 days outside of this election, and we're a week behind Thanksgiving. And what a great word for us today, Mark, to just be able to reset the focus. And folks, like, write this down if you're taking notes, and I hope you are. Our focus determines our reality. The question is, what are you looking at? Because whatever we focus on flourishes.
Absolutely. So if anything is good or right or pure or just, Philippians 4, think about such things. And it's more than it's not just a Jedi mind trick. It's not even just the psychological concept of a downward counterfactual. And I love that stuff. I geek out on that stuff. But I think it really is living your life in a way that you see it all as a gift. Every breath, a gift. I mean, Chris, right now, our hearts are pumping 6 quarts of blood through 60,000 miles of veins and arteries and capillaries. That's twice the circumference of the earth. And your heart will beat 100,000 times today, and we don't even think about it. But I remember one of the top cardiothoracic surgeons in the country attends our church, and I often ask him about the heart, and he'll sometimes like tear up, like it's such a mystery. And I've heard descriptions of a heart transplant, and here's what doctors can't do. They can't make it start beating. It just, there's something mysterious that happens that you can wire it and install it, so to speak, and put it in another person's chest. But I've heard surgeons describe this moment when a new heart begins beating in a new chest as just a moment of miracle and mystery. But Chris, here's my question. Does it take a heart transplant, friends? I mean, it shouldn't. And listen, it shouldn't take me getting healed from 40 years of severe asthma, which I have been, but it shouldn't take that for me to appreciate every breath is a miracle. And when you live life that way, I think it becomes far more joyful.
I love that, Mark, and just to be respectful of your time, we'll begin the descent in this conversation, but I want to spring off of that, because you've told me about that incredible moment in time where the Lord healed you of asthma. I know what Laura's been through with cancer, and you guys have walked through stuff. When we walk through adversity, for me at least, one of the catalysts for growth has been learning how to ask better questions, not only of people and situations, but of the Lord himself. Like, Lord, what do you want me to know about this moment in time? Lord, who do you want to be for me now in this season that you could have never been at any other point in my life? Not because your nature's new or changes, because I'm discovering an aspect of your character that I just haven't tapped into in another season. This brings me to asking better questions. I want to file away some new questions today, Mark. what are some of the best questions you've asked others that have helped you widen your view of your life and the Lord and really his goodness?
Yeah. One of my favorites is I have an 82-year-old spiritual father named Dick Foth, who is the best question asker I've ever met. And one of my favorite questions is, who left their fingerprints on your soul? It's a fun way to just begin to hear a person's story. Who has influenced you in a way that you couldn't really tell your story without sharing this person's impact on your life? So, Chris, that would be one question that comes to mind immediately. I love asking people who have experienced a measure of success. Say they started a business or had an idea and it became something pretty big. I love asking the Genesis question. When and where and how did you get that idea? What were the first steps that you take? I love going back and kind of asking that Genesis question. I think the best question, though, is probably not even a question. Tell me more. Chris, when I have a conversation, it's almost like speed chess. In my mind, I want to make sure that I'm not talking too much, that I'm tapping out, and I always want to keep that balance of asking questions to just open that other person up, because when we meet someone for the first time, it's like opening a book to page 117 and starting to read. Like if you haven't read page 98 or page 17 or page 2, you can't put it in context. So I think unpacking people's history is an art form, and it's good questions that help us do that.
One of my favorite questions I've ever asked you was regarding sort of your writing rhythm, and you told me a few years ago, Chris, I read 3,000 books before I ever wrote one. I think I got that quote right.
Yep.
What's the best book you've read this year, Mark?
Oh, that is so hard for me.
I knew it was gonna be.
Oh,
yeah.
Those, if I could flip my camera around, I mean, there were a couple hundred books that were part of the research that ended up in the 688 footnotes at the end of A Million Little Miracles. That is a hard choice. And there's part of me that it's nigh unto impossible to answer it, but I don't want to avoid it. So I really enjoyed a lot of the scientific books, whether it's a book, The Language of God, Francis Collins, but that's an old book. I read that years ago. But I really enjoy Wonder by Arthur Gordon. That's an older book. I Contain Multitudes, Ed Young. I love reading books like Bill Bryson, his book on the body. It's fascinating. Now, I would say that Yancey Brand book, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, that's the all-time classic. But what I want to do is I want to read anything. I don't have to agree with the worldview of the author.
Right. That's
what
good.
I want to do is just curate whatever knowledge I can from that book. And we may agree to disagree.
Yes.
Like I'm shocked. Like I just read a book on kind of a survey of different scientists, and then the opening sentence was like, in the vast universe, like I'm totally paraphrasing, but in the great vast universe where there's only one planet where we've discovered life forms and it's humankind, what we learned from that is you are not special. And I'm like, what? No. I think I would pull away the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So sometimes I read certain authors that shall we say are evangelists for atheism. And, listen, it's against my religion to impose my religion. Like this is my biblical tolerance biblical tolerance, Chris, is giving other people the same measure of free will that God gave me. So I'm not in the business of telling other people what to think, what to believe, but I'm shocked at the jump to conclusions that seem to just negate the existence of God when it's not good science and it's not common sense. And yet I'm made to look foolish for believing in intelligent design. Friends, it takes less faith to believe in that than it does. In fact, I love the way Glenn Scribner said this, and it's in the book. He said, Christians believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. Atheists believe in the virgin birth of the universe. Choose your miracle. So I think I just want a level playing ground. That's all I'm asking for, is just a level playing ground. And I think you can't prove or disprove either way. It's always an element of faith. But I think there's so much evidence, and hopefully a lot of that evidence in this book, that gives people a confidence. You don't have to apologize for believing that there is a God who said, let there be light. It makes so much scientific sense. And honestly, the other side doesn't. It's a complete violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Friends, things don't move towards greater order. They move towards entropy unless there's an outside force. And I believe that outside force has a name, and his name is Jesus.
Come on. There's the knockout punch, folks. Mark Batterson, it's always a joy to see you. I got to get you out of here. Can I give you 2 books, actually, you might enjoy? I just going through.
Do it.
Number 1, The Master of Change, Brad Stolberg. Or Master of Change, I should say, not The Master. Master of Change, Brad Stolberg. And then Dallas Willard's brand new book, Scandal of the Kingdom.
Ooh.
And you're saying, Chris, what? Dallas Willard has a brand new book. So check this out. His family, after he passed in 2013, found a manuscript or compiled a manuscript that was the sequel of The Divine Conspiracy, and they had it published, and it just came out 2 weeks ago, and it's blowing my mind.
You are kidding me, because
That's insane.
The Divine Conspiracy would rank.
Yep.
In those 3,000 books I read before writing one.
Yeah.
That Divine Conspiracy might be top 10.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it was wow. Okay.
It's the sequel. Mark, I'm a chapter in, and I'm going, oh Lord, I don't even know if I know you.
Wow.
So, anyway,
okay.
Mark, I know I got to get you going. It's always such a joy to see you. Thanks for being here today. We'll put links to all your stuff. Folks, go to the show notes at wintoday.tv. 1,000,000 Little Miracles is there right now. You're going to want to get 1, 50, or 100,000 copies of this thing. So it's great to see you.
Hey, you too, Chris. Blessings to each and every one.